Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor. We're pleased to welcome Julia Fine in conversation with Allison Wisdom this evening for the publication day of her new novel, The Upstairs House. First, a quick overview of webinars for those of you who are just joining us. The chat is closed, but you may want to keep the chat window open during the event as I will be dropping links to purchase books from Literati in that chat. If you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books in the description right below me. And if you're watching there, you can also subscribe to catch more of our events after they're live. If you're watching live, however, you can submit questions for the Q&A using the Q&A feature available to you at any time. And I will read a selection of those questions at the conclusion of the conversation this evening. As a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com for curbside pickup if you live in Southeast Michigan, or to have shipped to you at your home anywhere in the United States. And in lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. So whether you'd like to think of that as this week's or this month's or this year's subscription to our events, you can make a donation at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on when and where in the world you may be joining us from. And now I'll introduce tonight's author and our moderator. Julia Fine is a graduate of Columbia College Chicago's MFA program. She teaches writing in Chicago, where she lives with her husband and son. Speaking with her this evening, born, raised, and based in Houston, Texas, Allison Wisdom has an MFA from the Vermont College of Fine Arts, received the novel writing grant from Wedgwood Circle, and was a finalist for this year's Ernest Jaffe Award. She has attended Tin House and the Lighthouse Writers Workshop, where she was a finalist for the Emerging Writers Fellowship. Her short stories have been published in Plowshares, Electric Literature, The Rumpus, Indiana Review, and more. They can't hear you, but they can certainly sense it through the power of the internet. So please join me in welcoming Julia Fine and Allison Wisdom into your living rooms.
Hi, I'm Allison, and I'm so excited to be here with Julia to celebrate the publication of her second novel, The Upstairs House. And I just wanted to read you guys some of the wonderful things about The Upstairs House that people have been saying already. So first of all, it's a most anticipated book of 2021 for BuzzFeed, The Millions, and Pop Sugar, and has been featured on LitHub, E! News, and Good Morning America. It has been described as inventive, visceral, haunting, provocative, eerie. There are just so many wonderful ways people have described The Upstairs House, and I am just so excited to talk about it and to hear Julia tell us all of her things about The Upstairs House. But first, she's going to read to us from her novel. So Julia, take it away.
Thank you, Allison, for being here. Allison's book, We Can Only Save Ourselves, came out 2 weeks ago, early February, which at this point feels like 10 years ago, especially in Texas, where she is coming from. But anyway, her book is recently out. It's wonderful as well. I would be remiss in not making sure we start with that. But for today, for The Upstairs House, I am going to read to you from the book. I'm going to read just a very brief snippet from sort of the beginning-ish of the book. So Megan, the narrator, is a brand new mother. Her baby at this point is like 7, 8 days old. Her husband had to go on a work trip, and so he's not there. And Megan has just sort of come from her stairwell where she thinks she's met the ghost or the sort of apparition of Margaret Wise Brown, the children's author. Margaret Wise Brown lived upstairs. I found my house keys in the dog's water bowl, my sneakers in the shower. I said to myself, I'm tired. I watched a documentary about mid-century American clothiers. I said to myself, I'm having lucid dreams that reshape my reality. I heard someone sawing wood. I smelled cigarette smoke through our air vents. I considered climbing back up to the door and felt afraid. The door is where she found Margaret. I said to myself, this is your life. "You will miss these days," said the message board mothers, the baby books, the women who'd been through it all, who knew. These days and endless nights with Clara, the baby, at my breast. The 3 a.m. television glow, the fuzzy bathroom fan and lullabies. Supposedly, someday I'd miss them as I now missed long afternoons drinking beers on the patio, dinner dates and cab rides. People had told me that the first weeks of motherhood would be hard, but they hadn't told me how hard, how difficult it would be to contort myself into what Clara needed, how much she would need, how much time I would spend sleepless and thirsty and tied to the couch, nipples aching, how she would grunt and snort and sniffle in her bassinet, tongue dancing as she smelled my milk, how she would cry and I would not always be able to console her, how deeply I would feel this as my failure. I watched the furrow of her dreaming brow while she slept on my chest. As I sank into my own sleep, I tried not to feel it as a free fall, but an open pair of arms. "Don't wish the time away," they said. "Don't ever wish the time away." I thought things might be easier with my husband gone. No one to snipe at, no one to begrudge for sleeping soundly on the futon in the living room while I pinched myself awake at 4 a.m. No one to roll his eyes when I mentioned the noises upstairs. Of course, it was harder without him. I had only myself to talk to. I had to be up whenever Clara was. I had to take the dog for all of her walks. "Maybe you'll be nicer to him when he gets back, now that you've realized you need him," said my sister Annie over the phone. It was the end of my second full day solo, and I hadn't gotten my umbrella or Clara's stroller cover ready in time for a sudden downpour. I'd been soaking wet, with Clara soaking wet, and a soaking wet Solly, the dog, shaking herself dry in the front hall. Who was to blame here? I blamed Clara. Without her, I could have run inside. Solly and I never got caught in the rain before. "I am nice to him," I said. I very nicely FaceTimed Ben twice that day so Clara could see him, so she wouldn't forget him. I dreaded night, when I knew Ben was asleep and wouldn't hear his phone. I could handle Clara's round-the-clock nursing in the daytime, in the sunlight. I could handle the exhaustion if I had a ready tether to the world. Alone in the dark, the wait was impossible. Just thinking about night made my throat swell. "Mom said she would stay with you," Annie reminded me. "At this point, maybe take her up on it, or at least let me do a night shift." But as harrowing as the thought of those midnight feeds was, even worse was the idea that someone else would take them over, that Clara would wake up and whimper and not find Mommy there, that she would realize she'd be just fine with Grandma or Aunt Annie, that I was extraneous. Already, my daughter didn't need me. "It's fine," I said to Annie. "I've got it." And I'll just leave it there. Little taste.
Oh my gosh. So, okay, I was going to start with a different question, but now considering what you read, I want to start with this one. So that part that you just read, when I read it, it was just like, I mean, I haven't had a baby recently. I mean, 2 years ago, semi-recently, but it's just like the way you describe it, it is just, I mean, so profoundly like, it's exactly how it feels. And when I had a baby for the first time, my oldest daughter is 6. I didn't know anyone else felt that way. And this book has been so, like, I've been so thankful to see how many women writers are writing about childbirth and postpartum life. And you do it just so beautifully and so inventively that we'll talk about later. But first, I just want to talk about how you got to this story, why you felt compelled to write this particular story. It's such an important issue and it's a sensitive one. And I know you talk about this in your author's note, but for those of everyone who hasn't gotten a chance to read it yet, could you share a little bit about why this particular topic, why this particular book?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a very similar experience to you with when my first baby was born. I was the first of my super close friends and family to have a kid. And so I hadn't necessarily had anyone sit me down and tell me, like, this is what it actually is like once the baby comes out of you. I felt like I had been so prepared with literature and baby books and sort of I knew what pregnancy would be like. And I knew, and I just had nothing. It was like I got to when my baby would be born and I was like, I'm just so uncomfortable. I'm ready to feel good again. And then I didn't feel good again for months and months. And I just sort of felt like, why hadn't I read? a description of that postpartum period that really felt accurate to me. And this was in, it's funny to say, oh, this was in 2017, like not that long ago, but it actually sort of in the publishing world, when you look at some of the recent books that have come out, like it was a while ago, I guess. And
A lifetime ago, let's be
yeah,
clear.
well, but also like there just weren't any, like, and Now We Have Everything by, I'm blanking on her last name, Megan O'Connell, I think. Yeah, like that book had not come out yet, and that's nonfiction about just like postpartum period. Like this year there've been a rush of postpartum books, but I couldn't find any of those. I had like The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman from 1890, talking about how difficult it could be mentally. But I felt like, well, why this? It's time to write about this. And so I wanted to sort of provide like the book that I wish I had, something that told me like these are normal feelings, because then once I sort of made friends and got closer to some other new mothers and we talked about it, we realized like these are such common feelings, to be frustrated and exhausted and sort of not know what you're doing wrong and feel guilty and want to, toss your baby out the window. Like it's all so normal. But because there wasn't the literature there, and there, like, so societally, we don't really talk about it as much. People feel really alone when in reality they're experiencing something that's really common. And so I sort of felt like one of the things I could do with this book was like bring that conversation to light, and even just sort of letting people recognize even a sliver of themselves in what Megan is going through. I feel like then the book's done something.
Oh my gosh, it's done so much. I mean, when I was reading it, like I said, it hit me so profoundly. And I felt, even now, 6 years from having my first child, like to read something reflective of my experience, I feel so relieved and like that it wasn't just me. Even now when I know cognitively that it is a very common experience, but it also just makes me feel like a little bit sad that there are so many women, two of us included, who have felt like this after childbirth, and you just didn't know. And it's just, becoming a mother is so harrowing and wonderful, and honestly like a complete horror show in so many ways. And I love how you have really like heightened that with the kind of story you're telling. It's not just a postpartum story. It's a straight up ghost story. And I've noticed in recent years that there are a lot more books, like you said, that are kind of dealing with postpartum life or early childhood, having like a toddler or whatever. And they're writing about it in a vein that is very like horror tinged. Like I know we've talked before about Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin and The Need by Helen Phillips, and Fever Dream like just has stayed with me forever.
Yeah.
But why do you think it is so like there's been more books about kind of not just motherhood and postpartum life, but specifically writing through like the horror lens or kind of a surreal and supernatural vein?
It's such a surreal time of your life, especially immediately postpartum is one thing where you're awake at weird hours and, you're hearing things, and the only person who can confirm what just happened is this like tiny 2-month-old baby. And so that's like right for horror. But I also think that being a parent of small children, like you're just in a different world than everybody else. Like I think of back when we took children to restaurants, that happened. But I think of like taking my son when he was little to a restaurant, and like you're at a big family dinner, you're at a big, group thing, but you're the one with the kid. Like you're not at that meal in the same way everybody else is at that meal. Like you just exist in a separate world. Like you are beholden to bedtimes and bath time, and your kid dumping, like you were talking about your son dumping dishwasher liquid all over the floor. It just isn't, and I think the farther removed, at least looking at sort of my own parents or my friends who have older children, like the farther removed you are from that time period, the more you realize like, oh, that is a whole nother world, a whole nother life. And it just works so well, I think, for, I think a lot of these books that have come out recently, I think about something like The Need, or like Kate Hopeday's If Then has a sort of postpartum mom aspect to it, where people, like you have moved into a totally separate life where you don't know the rules and you don't know the boundaries and you don't know sort of what's what, and that just lends itself really, really well to horror.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's such a great observation about like it is a whole different world, and it is kind of a world in which anything can happen. Like if you
there's no logic in baby world. that's for sure.
Just starting with growing a baby inside your body, I mean, it's just like if that's not like body horror, I don't really know what is. And so kind of as soon as that happens, you're like, okay, it's a whole new ball game. Everything, the rules are off the table. And it's just, you're right. It's a completely different world. And I mean, I could talk about childbirth and like postpartum days for literally ever, but I know not everybody wants to necessarily go down that road. But if any of you do, definitely ask some questions.
Afterwards.
Okay, but speaking of horror and the actual ghosts, I am dying to hear how you got to Margaret and Michael. Michael Strange is Margaret's lover in this very complicated and borderline toxic abusive relationship. So I would love to hear, how did you get there to Margaret and Michael?
Yeah, so I had started, I knew sort of as soon as my son was born that I wanted to write, not even that I wanted, that I felt drawn and sort of felt like I had to write about the postpartum period. And at the same time, my kids both are really bad sleepers, especially my son. And so they tell you with like sleep training, oh, have a routine where you take a bath and you listen to the same song and you read the same book, and it never worked. But I did read Good Night Moon every day for like 10 months. And I was struck by how it never really got old for me. I hate to say like it's a poem, and this is not to say that other children's books aren't poetry, but it really reads more like a poem than it does like some of the other kids' books that you read to your children where you just want to throw it away after maybe 2 or 3 reads. But so this book, it just stuck with me, and I just became curious about, there's that page Goodnight Nobody, which is just so weird and out of the blue, and there's no illustration and it makes no sense. And so it's like, who wrote this book? And I sort of expected, when I looked up Margaret Wise Brown, I had sort of this idea like, oh, she's probably like a grandma, like the old lady in the rocking chair and the bunny hat, And then as soon as I realized that she was like the polar opposite of that, she died at 42. So she was like literally never an old lady. She was bisexual. She was a rabbit hunter. There's like stories about her like skinning rabbit pelts. She had fur everywhere. Like PETA would hate her. She just had this weird, she had like a little cabin in Maine with no electricity and would swim naked in the water and had no refrigerator. So she had like her wine in the stream. I don't know. She just was fascinating. And she had this relationship with an older woman named Michael Strange, who had been married previously to John Barrymore, the actor, so Drew's like great uncle, or the Barrymore family. They had this relationship, and it was, like you said, just by all accounts, her friends all said in the letters, the letters between the two confirm in her journals, like it was a toxic relationship, but they were deeply in love, but also they hated each other. I don't know, it was just so fascinating and so interesting. And I felt like, one, how is it possible that Margaret Wise Brown hasn't been sort of popularized in fiction or on film in sort of a really big way already? And two, once I was like, I want to do that, I realized, also this like sort of abusive, toxic lover relationship is a little bit like a mother-child relationship. And when you look at the book, The Runaway Bunny, is where sort of that connection is made. Because I think I say that at first, and people are like, you're not in an abusive relationship with your baby. And like, you're right, you're not. But this push and pull of like need and wanting to not be needed, and love and sort of wanting the distance and wanting to be close is like sort of that's what The Runaway Bunny is about. And Margaret Wise Brown actually based that book on this sort of French folk love poem where instead of a mother and a child, it was two lovers, sort of a like, I'm going to run away from you. Oh, well, I'm coming after you, which is pretty like when you put it that way, it's kind of creepy and like.
I can't read The Runaway Bunny. We have it, and I just like physically cannot. I don't know what it is.
It's much less creepy when it's sort of like a mother saying, I'm going after my kid, even though you're leaving. But anyway, I sort of let that be the connective tissue there to sort of say, yeah, I can write a book that's about these two women that is also about a postpartum mom. And let me just smash it together and see what happens.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's brilliant how you did that. And you just like, it is so weird. It is such a like a weird idea that you just.
I know. I can't help myself. I just am
wonderful
to write weird ones.
I love it. And I mean, it was so fun to read and horrible. And you execute it just so honestly, flawlessly. And I got to read your essay in Lit Hub today about fictionalizing and not fictionalizing Margaret Wise Brown. And again, I hate to make you repeat yourself, but I was just so blown away by your insights and how articulately and eloquently you talked about it. And I would love if you would share a little bit about that process with everyone who might not have had a chance to read it yet today.
Yeah, so it's online. It's on LitHub. Maybe John can find it and link it to you, but that's not his job, so we're not going to ask him to. But anyway, so yeah, no, I wrote an essay about the process of fictionalizing Margaret Wise Brown, which was very interesting. Part of, I mean, her public image. It's not like anyone is trying to hide who she actually was, but at the same time, like no one's really pushing some of the less marketable aspects of her personality. And so she wasn't, I mean, she was a person, right? She was like a person the way that you and I are people. And so she had, oh, thanks, John. John just shared the link if you want to read it. So there were aspects of her personality that were not that great. Like sometimes she sort of put herself first in her business interests and screwed over her publisher or some of her writing partners. She had a friend, Esfer Slobodkina, who actually wrote the book Cats for Sale, which is another sort of classic children's book, who was Jewish. And in the 40s, Margaret found out that she was Jewish and was sort of like weird about it and wasn't, was just sort of flat out like, well, I've been this way my whole life where I, am like anti-Semitic. So why would I change my mind? Things like that. So I wrote about that in the essay, and I wrote about how instead of sort of saying, ooh, I don't like her because of this, it actually made me like her more because it made her more of a real person. It made it easier to sort of to access her, to find her. It's really hard when you're looking at like historical figures to sort of get past that sheen of, this is a historical figure and this is like the capital T truth of what their life was like. And all I can really do is quote her journal and like pop that in. Like, how do I fictionalize her? And the way that I was able to do that, I think, was taking some of these sort of less savory aspects and thinking like, okay, so she was a person who could, be lazy, and she was a person who could be selfish, and I can be lazy and selfish. So therefore I can relate to her. And that's how I can sort of make her both truthful and like well-rounded and real at the same time.
Yeah, you did it so well. And I was so struck by, not only by the challenge you set up for yourself, where you were writing about a real person. And like you said, you're also fictionalizing her and trying to honor the truth of who she was, but you're also writing her from Megan's, interactions with her and what she takes away. And through the book, we're not sure if it is postpartum psychosis and it's just a hallucination or if it is an actual legit haunting. But we're getting her just the way that Megan gets her. And so there's really just multiple layers happening of developing this character. And I was just so impressed by how well you did that. And with Michael Strange too.
It's a lot easier. She is, you read her stuff and you're like, I know who this one is. She's one who like, maybe I wouldn't want to like know her in real life, but she is real fun to read about.
Yeah. Honestly, this is going to sound horrible. She reminds me of my crazy grandmother that I had. I was like, oh my gosh, my Granny Tiny, this is very similar to who she was. So my poor dad growing up, imagine that. So I wanted to talk to you about Megan. So as I was reading, she reminded me a lot of Eleanor from The Haunting of Hill House. And I've seen you compared to Shirley Jackson. I thought it was a really apt comparison. And, in Hill House, Eleanor's kind of prone to these digressions of imagination and flights of fancy. And I noticed that Megan has that too. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about developing Megan and what you were really hoping readers would take away from her, and if there were other inspirations for her besides just your wonderful brain.
I love that comparison to Eleanor and Hill House. I would not have sort of come upon it myself, but I totally can see it. And Shirley Jackson is definitely, like, I love her writing, and you can't really be a woman writing literary horror, speculative stuff and not sort of have some sort of something. But Megan, to me, the biggest thing about Megan is, so she is, at the time that she becomes pregnant and has her daughter, she's working on her PhD in history, and her dissertation is about modernist children's literature, sort of mid-century, like Margaret Wise Brown era, like progressive early education, and the books that went alongside with sort of this new way of looking at early childhood education that came out of sort of John Dewey and Lucy Sprague Mitchell. When people first started to say, like, we should have preschool and elementary school and not just whatever it is that they had. And so Megan is working on a dissertation about that. And I think for me, so much of her personality is sort of researcher and student of history in a way that she really is dependent on sort of this idea that there is a concrete truth out there, and there is, like, history with a capital H. And so I think what I see happening with her is she's somebody who her whole life has been very just, like, boxed in, and a lot of it, you read about her relationship with her parents and her parents' relationship with each other, and she has sort of some family trauma from when she was a child that has led her to become pretty repressed, pretty sort of tightly wound. And as she has the baby, sort of some of that control, she is just forced to let go of some of that control, and she's forced to sort of reconceptualize what history is and sort of who these historical figures are, and also sort of her hold on herself. So every time that she sort of, like, starts to slip away, you watch her, like, grab it back until the breaking point where she, like, hasn't slept in 6 weeks and her husband's gone, and all of a sudden all of these feelings that she's repressed her whole life just need to come out. So yeah, I don't envy her. I think that she is not especially well adjusted, but she was a very fun character to write.
Yeah, you talk about her so beautifully, and one of the questions I had that you kind of have answered is about how throughout the book she is constantly kind of parsing words and the etymology of words and where they come from, and it's always at a moment when, like you said, it is just a desire to kind of rein in all those scary, hard things that are out of your control. And two, in the footnotes, I wondered if you could tell us, so there are footnotes throughout the book, because in addition to having the narrative of Megan and Margaret and Michael, we also have little snippets of Megan's dissertation. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the kind of experience of getting to write your own dissertation and the footnotes and kind of what role you think those play for the book overall.
Yeah, so the dissertation, actually, I had a lot of information about early childhood education and about sort of Margaret Wise Brown's history and Michael Strange's history that I needed to get to the reader without it just being Megan saying, this is what my dissertation's about, and here's, like, pages of exposition. Or my initial thought was, like, what if I just give a reading list at the front of the book where I say, like, read this biography and this work, and then you'll come to this book with everything you need. So my challenge was, how do I give that information to the reader? And it took a while. I had actually already sold the book and was sort of playing around with these different parts of it when I finally realized, like, oh, I can just excerpt the dissertation and I can cut it off when it starts to get boring. Which, it's funny, my editor was sort of like, you're not writing. She had to, like, basically tell me, you're not writing a dissertation. Like, don't focus on this so much. Take this out. So I have, like, a lot of dissertation that has just sort of, I also made it all up. So it's like, not only was I writing, it wasn't even like I was writing a real dissertation. It's like I was making up sources and making up these schools of thought. So, like, I went a little crazy with it. But so that was, it started as a way to get that information to the reader in sort of like a nice digestible chunk without having to sort of interrupt the main narrative. But I also realized pretty quickly that it's a book about, this is a book about a haunting, obviously. And it's about sort of Megan's body being haunted with sort of motherhood and this baby and the ghosts of Margaret and Michael. But it's also sort of about her work being haunted, and it's about sort of what legacy is, and sort of the way that a child is a project, and the way that a book is a project or a dissertation is a project. And so gradually throughout the course of the book, you continue to see the dissertation, but you can also sort of see how these ghosts are haunting not only like the house, it's sort of a poltergeist story, but also haunting the manuscript. And the footnotes were my way into that, to sort of show like those two, the world of sort of the ghosts and this hauntedness, and also the more sort of practical, like maybe what Megan would have written beforehand. And so I had a lot of fun with the footnotes. But it let me sort of have that double world of the manuscript and show that haunting sort of in a very like literal on the page way.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you have everything affecting, it's just this like triangle of what a big giant mess. You've got the ghost and
I should be the blur. What a big giant mess. But
executed so well. But like it's funny how you described that the dissertation would kind of break off before it got boring. To me, worked so well on a thematic level as far as the interruptions. Like you're kind of getting into the swing of things, and then it's, your baby needs you, or if you're massively pregnant, you have to pee, or your back hurts, or whatever it is. You're constantly, there's no way to finish a thought. Like I can remember, back in the day when you would go places and have play dates, and you would be like, I would sometimes leave a play date and be like, wow,
what happened?
I don't think I finished a single thought. Like, I don't think we had any actual full conversations, because somebody's kid was always like spitting up or pooping or, running away. And so it just, it worked so well. It's so cool to hear, how you imagined it and how it comes across, and just, it's so great. So I do want to talk about the What Should Be Wild, and your experience of writing this book versus What Should Be Wild. Was one more fun? Do you have a favorite? Was one harder? I want to hear it all.
It was so different because I wrote What Should Be Wild. I wrote it in grad school. And so I was working, but my work was very secondary. And it felt like my intellectual life was like totally the focus, which as in graduate school, that's the goal. So I had just it was a different experience, because I also was taking in a lot of different stimuli, I guess, because I'd get like assigned to read a book for class, and I'd think like, oh, this book can somehow go into, like even subconsciously, like, it'll go into my manuscript. So it's kind of disjointed. And I also was, by the end of it, by the time I was really like editing and finishing What Should Be Wild, I was adjuncting and nannying, and I had sort of, my schedule was such that I had like 2 or 3 days a week where I was home by myself, and could just be like, this is my writing day. And it was very free, and it was very like, like what will come to me today? And the upstairs house, I started thinking about it basically when my son was born. I started really writing it in earnest when he was about a year old, and I had like nap time. I had nap time. If I didn't get it done during nap time, it wasn't going to happen. I didn't really have a ton of time definitely no time to write, and not even all that much time to like think about it, just because, like you said, I still just have this brain of, mom brain, which is, it's sort of a stereotype, but like it, your brain physically changes when you have a kid, and also you're not sleeping as well. Point being, I had really rigid constraints, and I think that actually worked really well for this book, and it helped me sort of make it propulsive, and it helped me budget my time. And it's hard for me to say sort of if it was because I had already written a novel, I could streamline more easily the second time, or it was this particular book, but I actually had a lot easier of a time writing this book. And the research was so much fun. I could just live in research forever, as a lot of us, I think, can. But the research for this was a lot of fun, because it's a lot of sort of like wealthy mid-century New Yorkers, which Who doesn't want to
glamorous.
look at pictures of people's like gorgeous Upper East Side apartments in 1940? Like, who doesn't want to see that stuff?
And I mean, I like the research and how fun it was comes through, and it just, I mean, it was so fun to read, and you know, it's a perfect escape. I mean, at the same time, well, it also feels very claustrophobic in certain ways because of Megan's perspective. You're stuck in this perspective, and you know, that mirrors so well the you know, newborn mom life at the beginning days of postpartum. We have just a couple more minutes before we start having some questions from the audience. But I want to know, first of all, do you believe in ghosts? Second of all, do you have any favorite ghost stories, haunted house novels? What are your recommendations?
Do I believe in ghosts? You know, I don't know if I believe in ghosts. I'm currently in, we actually like just bought a house and are moving, but we have like this little 2-week overlap. And so I'm alone in an empty house right now. So I feel like if I say I don't believe in ghosts, I'm just like putting myself in a terrible situation.
Right.
We'll say maybe. Do I believe in ghosts in the, like, you'd walk up into your stairwell and Margaret Wise Brown would be there? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I do love ghost stories. I like ghost stories where you don't know if it's a ghost or not, or where the ghost is more like metaphoric. So I think of like Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, like to me is like such a ghost story, even though there's never an actual ghost. The Turn of the Screw was a huge, you can probably, as I say that, you can see that it was a really big influence on this, just that question of, you know, how much of it is like a ghost making you unhinged and how much of it is you becoming unhinged and seeing ghosts. What other ghost stories do I love? Fever Dream, I feel like, is a ghost story by Samantha Schweblin. Mm-hmm. I love that one. Yeah.
Those are some really
they're all from like 100 years ago.
That is prime ghost story time.
That's true. That's true.
Great. Yes, it's so good. And your book, I mean, it fits in. What I love about this book is obviously so many things, but you know, it belongs in the ghost story canon. It belongs in the postpartum life canon. And it's amazing how you were able to take these two disparate things and bring them together in such a meaningful way. And I just admire it so much. And so now I think we're going to come back. John's going to come back and ask some questions from the audience. So I'm excited to see what people have asked.
Yeah, just and a reminder to our viewers that you can submit questions now at any time, and I'll read some of them. Our first question is from Stephanie, who asks, for both Julia and Allison, who is your dream reader? Who do you most want to reach with your work?
You want to go first?
Sure. Who is my dream reader? I don't know. I honestly, this is going to sound so sappy and silly, but I feel like I'm like Allison is my dream reader. I want, you know, somebody who just Allison, just buy her. But someone I hope that this book reaches people who either have kids right now and are feeling sort of isolated and weird about it and questioning how much of what they're feeling is normal and how much of sort of, I just think like we said in the beginning, it's so normal to be confused and resentful, and like postpartum depression is really, really common. And I want, if people can read this book, see sort of a bit of themselves, see sort of that what they've been through is normal and okay and sort of worthy of literature and thought and time. I think that's the dream. And then also people who haven't had kids and are, you know, want to support parents, which sadly, in 2021 in America, it can feel at times like there's really not a lot of support for parents. So if you want to support the new parents in your life, I would hope that this book provides like some insight into what they may be feeling or thinking.
Yeah, that's so great. And like, I am thankful this book is in the world for that reason. And, you know, postpartum depression, I think is so interesting how it's, okay, I know you watched the Britney Spears documentary.
Of course. Yes, I'm so excited to talk about it.
Okay, let's go there. So when I was watching it, so that was 2007, and I can remember I was watching it with my husband, and he was like, kind of half paying attention. I was like, it's 2007. It's time for Brittany's about to shave her head. And he was like, what? And I just was thinking back to that time, like postpartum depression, no one was talking about,
No.
or I was quite a bit younger and I certainly wasn't thinking about it, but like, it was not a part of the conversation. And even when I had my first baby and I had postpartum depression and I was like, that's not what this is.
Yes. Okay. So I had that experience too. And I hope that this book, I think that the term baby blues is like the most damaging, patronizing. I think it does so much damage. And so when we talk about like language, you had asked about language earlier in this book and like what words can do, like the way that what you call something, the way that you label something, the way it like affects how you think about yourself and about how you think about what you're going through. And so to have the term baby blues floating around out there, I think makes so many women think like, I need to just buck up and, this is nothing and I can get over this. And it's so, if I never hear it again, I will be thrilled. Did you have that experience too?
Yes. And I could just remember having conversations with somebody once, and I was like, I just don't know if I like being a mom. Like, I just don't know if I like it. My first baby was so hard. She cried all the time, like literally never slept. We'd go places and people would be like, your baby is so alert. And I was like, and literally all the time. And then I was like, well, I do love her. And like, I am glad she's here. And they were like, well, then you're fine. And I was like, okay, I'll just suck it up, I guess. And then it just like kept not getting better and not getting better. And eventually it did. And, but yeah, it's just, I am the person this book was written for. Literally like reading it, I was like, this is a book for me. It's the book I didn't know I needed. And with that said, if anyone, you people out there who I can't see, you can come find me on social media. And if you want to tell me all about your postpartum depression and anxiety, I am here. I've done it. So without getting too sappy. And also, my answer to the question was also Julia. Because when Julia read my book, it was like, she's such a generous reader, and she just responded to it so well. And she's a mom, and my book is a mother-daughter thing, in addition to being a cult thing, and just enjoying the book. And somebody like Julia, who I admire so much, enjoying it was just like, that is the kind of person that I'm hopeful for reads that book. I want everyone to read it, but Julia is just the best. And it's so
to fill everyone in to Allison's book, We Can Only Save Ourselves. But I'm just gonna
there it is.
Hi, Allison Wisdom. It's about a suburban, she's a sophomore in high school, right?
Senior high school, yeah.
In high school. So a high school student who sort of lives this perfect suburban life, who gets lured into a sort of Charles Manson-esque cult by this charismatic but also really icky older man.
Yeah.
And it's about the mothers in the neighborhood sort of narrate in this sort of Greek chorus of where did this girl go wrong, and what could we have done differently, and how lucky we are not to be her mother. And it's really wonderful. And you should definitely buy it from Literati right now.
We have another question from a viewer. I guess for both of you, I think we could have you both answer this. If you could choose someone to haunt you, who would it be and why?
I am like ashamed that I've never considered this, and I don't have like a go-to answer. Do you, Julia?
No, I don't. But now I'm like, there's just so many choices. Like, I feel like I need a category of like music or art or, who do I want?
It would have to be somebody who's enjoyable. Obviously, and not scary. So, and that's a lot of people, I guess. That's such a good question.
Like Dorothy Parker? Probably not.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about this one.
Can we table this and like come back to it?
Yes, I actually have a
later.
You have an answer, John?
No, I don't have an answer. I was thinking that this question is sort of predicated on like wanting to be haunted, which I don't know if I would
Yeah, that's a good
want?
Oh, I mean,
nobody.
I know Julia knows this story, but I before I moved into our new house,
Allison is haunted.
we lived in a haunted house, and I do believe in ghosts. I don't believe, like Julia said, that Margaret Wise Brown would be like building a house inside my house, but like, and the ghost never bothered me, but it did bother my husband and also my sister who lives there currently. I don't know. I guess the ghost didn't care about me. Try not to take it personally, but yeah, I wouldn't want to be haunted. I mean, as much as I like enjoy ghost stories, I cannot even imagine what I would do. I mean, it'd be terrible.
Maybe if one could be haunted by something that was like a helpful poltergeist, like get something down for you, or
Yeah.
Someone who would like clean the house and take care of it. Like Mary Poppins ghost.
Yes. Oh, that's the answer.
That's my answer. I would like to be haunted by the Julie Andrews version of Mary Poppins because the book version is kind of mean.
Yeah, I know. And kind of weird.
Yeah, I wouldn't want the book version.
Definitely Julie Andrews. Emily
Of course Julie Andrews can haunt me. I mean, I know she's still alive, but
yeah. She's like, thanks.
I'm here. I'm listening.
Yeah, Julie Andrews, if you're tuned in.
I have a craft-based question for both of you. Obviously, these books deal with difficult themes or are in genres that are, spine-tingling, for lack of a better term. And both of you are sort of using those kinds of, for lack of a better word, genre tropes to sort of get at different things. But to write these novels, you have to inhabit characters and situations that are not like pleasant, and spend some time in them. And I know that in acting, like in drama, like stage acting, there's a process of like grounding out, they call it, at the end of a rehearsal, to sort of like discharge the intensity of maybe something that you're representing. And I'm wondering if there are similar like practices for you as writers to sort of like separate yourself from how you get close to the reality of the work that you're depicting, or if it's sort of just like discharged in the process of in the work itself, in the writing and editing itself.
I mean, I would say it is in the process itself. I think that with this book, what I sort of did is if I had a thought where it's like, ooh, I feel really icky to feel this way about my kid. But what if I sort of translate it to fiction and I push it even further? So like if I feel here, what if in the book then the character feels all the way over here? I feel like that was my sort of catharsis in a way. And I would never say like, oh, writing fiction is therapy, because like only therapy is actually therapy. But I do think was an element of sort of something therapeutic about it, because in taking sort of my little inkling of frustration and sort of channeling it here, I feel like maybe, I mean, my kids might see it differently, but I think it gave me sort of room for it in a place that was outside of where I really couldn't have it, which is the way that I was relating to my family. So yeah, I guess the release is the writing for me.
That makes total sense with what you were writing about. I'm trying to think for me, like I cannot really write about like childbirth and postpartum life because it's like still too tender for me to write about. But I think for me, there's like a switch that you have to flip from going, like, I have 2 children. I only have been working really on the weekends when my husband is home because we've not been in school or had childcare or whatever. So I just I'll go over to my parents' house and sit on their back porch. And then on the drive home, it's kind of my like time to, okay, now I'm switching back to mom. And I can hardly think about what I just got finished writing, because now I walk in the door and everyone's like, it's someone's dumped dish soap on the floor, which is what happened literally right before I was getting onto this call. And it's, a huge mess. And so then I don't really even have time to go through any kind of process. But I mean, in a way, it's kind of nice. I can leave the work where the work is and then focus on my other work, which is mothering.
I like that. I had to think about that. I think that thinking of parenting as work is, I mean, our home life balance, everything is just sort of upended this past year, and including our home life balance. But I have not gotten as much writing. I sort of have had a third book a year ago. I was like, I have momentum for a third book. Here I go. And then everything happened and I lost the momentum. With, again, like, I was pregnant and then I had a newborn and then childcare. And so I'm trying to sort of tell myself, like, okay, there's the work. And this is sort of what the Upstairs House is about too. There's the work that you do, sort of the intellectual work and sort of the art that you make. And then there's the work of raising a child and parenting and sort of being a present, both parent or spouse or partner, whoever it is that you need to be present for in your life. And I think that thinking about it in that way can help sort of assuage some of the guilt of, like, wow, a year has gone by and I've written 300 words.
Yeah, definitely. Very well said.
Well, we've reached the top of the hour. Julia Fine, Allison Wisdom, thank you so much for joining us this evening at Home with Literati. Of course, you can purchase both of their books on the event page that brought you here. If you're watching us live and if you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books in the description right below me. We hope you both continue to stay safe and be well, and we hope to have you in the bookstore for the next books or for the paperbacks very, very soon. But until then, please continue to be well. And to all of our attendees, thank you so much for joining us as well. We hope you continue to stay safe and be well. And we'll see you at the next event. So take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye, all. Good night.